reports from the world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alison Lagrange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global south. Join me every weekday live on First Post. Hello and welcome to First Post Africa, where we get you the top stories from the continent and from across the world. I'm Alison Lagrange, live from Durban, South Africa. First, let's take a look at the headlines. The UK signs a $468 million contract to supply the Indian Army with UK-manufactured lightweight missiles during British Prime Minister Keir Starmer's first visit to India. EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen thanks the European Parliament for its strong support after a wide majority of the Assembly rejects twin confidence motions against her. The DRC President Felix Tshisekedi makes a personal appeal to Rwanda's Paul Kagame to stop supporting insurgents in the DRC and to work together for peace at a Brussels event attended by both leaders. Typhoon Halong hits southern Japan's Izu Islands, bringing heavy rain and high winds. Authorities advise citizens to evacuate the islands. And Hungarian writer Laszlo Krasznahorkai wins the Nobel Prize in Literature. He is considered by many as Hungary's most important living author, whose works explore themes of postmodern dystopia and melancholy. Hello and welcome. Our top story is from the Horn of Africa. Eritrea has dismissed Ethiopia's accusations of preparing to launch a war as provocative sabre-rattling. Now, this comes after Ethiopia accused Eritrea of actively preparing for a war in a letter to the UN chief Antonio Guterres. In the letter, Ethiopia's foreign minister accused the Eritrean government of colluding with an opposition group based in Ethiopia's northern Tigray region. The group being talked about is the hardliner faction of the Tigray People's Liberation Front, or the TPLF. The TPLF is a politically banned group that dominated the Ethiopian politics for nearly 3 decades. Ethiopia has also accused Eritrea and the hardline opposition faction of funding, mobilizing and directing armed groups to Ethiopia's Amhara, where the federal army has been facing rebels for several years. The latest clash highlights the escalating tensions between the two neighbours over control of the Red Sea. Now, to understand the conflict, let's take a closer look at the decades-long bloody history of Ethiopia and Eritrea. Eritrea gained independence from Ethiopia in 1993. Following that, a bloody border war broke out between the two countries from 1998 to 2000. That killed tens of thousands of people. Relations thawed between the two neighbours in 2018 after Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed came to power and signed a peace deal with President Isaias Afwerki. Now, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed then even received a Nobel Prize for the peace agreement in 2019. Eritrean troops also supported the Ethiopian federal forces during the war in northern Tigray region between 2020 and 2022. Since then, relations have again turned frosty between the two neighbours, with Eritrea accusing landlocked Ethiopia of eyeing its Assab port on the Red Sea. Now, Ethiopia legally lost access to the Red Sea after Eritrea's independence. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has reiterated his desire for Ethiopia to regain Red Sea access several times, and this has caused alarm in Eritrea. Though Ethiopia has insisted that it wants to engage in good faith negotiations with its neighbour, Eritrea is not convinced. In recent months, Eritrea has been strengthening ties with Ethiopia's top rival, Egypt, and Ethiopia has faced intense backlash from Egypt and the Sudan over its Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, built on the Blue Nile River. Ethiopia's downstream neighbours have slammed the dam as an existential threat. Now, what has further fueled disputes is the recent surge in Nile waters that have inundated homes in Egypt and have displaced thousands in the Sudan. Egypt has accused the giant Nile Dam of worsening seasonal floods. However, Ethiopia has rejected those accusations. As Ethiopia faces pushback from its neighbours over control of the Nile River and the Red Sea, it remains to be seen if these disputes escalate into a broader regional conflict. And for more on this, we have with us Moses Crispus Okello, who is a senior researcher at the Institute for Security Studies, joining us live from Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. Welcome to Firstpost Africa.
Thank you, Alison.
Now, Ethiopia's letter to the UN alleges collusion between Eritrea and the banned TPLF. How credible are these claims, and what strategic motivations might Eritrea have in aligning itself with the TPLF against Ethiopia at this moment?
Alison, the letter written by the Ethiopian Foreign Minister to the United Nations Secretary General on the 2nd of October alleges that Eritrea, in collusion with the TPLF of north of Ethiopia, are planning a war. Now, this allegation has been around for a while, but as you have rightly put it, Eritrea completely denies this and makes its own counter accusations. Now, it should be important to know that Eritrea and Ethiopia have had an on and off a relationship over a long period of time, and therefore this new and renewed rhetoric is not going to be the first time that we see some kind of tension between the two of them. What is good to note is that while this rhetoric is heightened, both parties are indeed, in fact, showing some degree of restraint.
Now, Moses, Ethiopia has been increasingly vocal about its desire to regain access to the Red Sea, a stance that has in the past alarmed Eritrea. To what extent is this dispute over sea access fueling these current tensions? And could it become a pretext for broader regional confrontation?
Alison, sea access for Ethiopia is without a doubt one of the many factors in this context that Ethiopia and Eritrea find themselves in. However, the relationship between these two and the factors that are fueling these tensions are quite historical, symbolic, as well as economic in some ways. So it would be rather foolhardy to isolate one and elevate it as the primary reasons for the tensions. That having been said, Ethiopia is a country, and at one way or the other, its desire for access to the sea is shaping its behavior.
Right. And what role might regional bodies like the African Union or even international actors such as the UN or Gulf states play in de-escalating these growing Ethiopia-Eritrea this rift?
If you listen carefully to the undertones coming both from Asmara and Addis Ababa, it's very clear, at least to me, that both parties are crying out to a credible mediator to help them to address this tension, which is growing between them. Ethiopia's letter to the United Nations seemed to suggest that Ethiopia would be open to a negotiation within the context of an economic integration framework. Whether that is pursued by the United Nations, to which the letter was addressed, or some other entity, the African Union, or even the Intergovernmental Organization, is yet to be seen. It's important to note, though, that within the history of tension between these two countries, they've always prioritized addressing their issues on their own. So most likely what would be needed is a facilitator who is able to dislodge them from these current tensions and then provide a framework that can trigger talks.
Moses, thank you for being with us on Firstpost Africa.
Thank you, Alison.
And let's shift our focus now to Madagascar, a country currently witnessing youth-led anti-government protests triggered by power and water crises. Its president, Rajoelina, has sought a one-year deadline to fix the nation's problems, or he will step down. He hosted a town hall-style meeting at the presidential palace in the capital with government supporters and took sharp questions from the public.
Within a year, there will be no more load shedding, particularly in Antananarivo, but also, by the end of my term of office, there will be no more load shedding anywhere in Madagascar. I pledge that we will do everything in our power to accelerate the energy transition in Madagascar and implement all of the projects. If there are still power cuts in Madagascar within a year, I will resign.
The meeting followed continuing of youth protests that have killed at least 22 people since the 25th of September. The stir, led by the Gen Z Mada movement, has triggered by anger over the persistent power and water shortages. But it soon escalated into broader dissatisfaction over corruption, unemployment, and the rising cost of living crisis.
It is normal for the people to protest because the people are hungry. Salaries are no longer enough in Antananarivo. May the state and its leaders take note of these deaths that were entirely preventable.
The Malagasy president condoled the deaths and blamed the rioters for the chaos. Rajoelina has invited protesters for talks and has been holding meetings as part of his pledge to listen more. He said that the issues can only be solved through conversations and not protests.
There have been deaths. We completely agree. And I truly sympathize with the suffering and pain of the families who have lost loved ones. But I want to tell you that these deaths are not protesters. They are not students. They are rioters. They are the ones who looted.
However, the Gen Z movement has rejected the president's call for talks. The demonstrators have been insisting on his resignation and staged fresh protests today. The protesters claim that talks cannot take place with a government that has been repressing them and has assaulted and humiliated its youth in the streets. The statement came after the police cracked down on the protesters during the recent demonstrations. The security forces deployed rubber bullets and fired tear gas to disperse the crowds from the protest sites. To quell these protests, Rajoelina sacked his entire government last week. He appointed an army general as prime minister to end the stir. But the protest movement has also rejected the premier's appointment. However, street demonstrations appear to have weakened in recent days. Protests calling for reforms may not be a new thing for Rajoelina. He himself rose to power in 2009 after leading mass protests. The stir triggered military intervention and toppled the then president's government. But the dynamics have changed now. Rajoelina is in power, and on the other hand is the angry youth demanding basic human rights. Will the president pay heed to their demands, or will this tide cause Rajoelina to lose his seat? And moving on now, let's turn our attention to the war in Gaza. In a major breakthrough, Israel and Hamas have agreed to the first phase of the Gaza peace deal, which is being brokered by US President Donald Trump. World leaders have hailed the deal, which would see the release of Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners, the withdrawal of Israeli forces, and the entry of aid into Gaza. The Israeli aid blockade has triggered a hunger crisis in Gaza, where most of the 2.2 million residents have been driven from their homes. Israel has faced widespread criticism for blocking the entry of aid into Gaza. Last week, the Israeli forces intercepted the global Sumud flotilla that was carrying aid to the war-torn enclave, sparking global protests. Among those aboard the flotilla was a group of South African activists, including Nelson Mandela's grandson, Mandla Mandela. Mandela, along with other activists, were deported to South Africa after being detained by the Israeli forces. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa called Israel's interception of their boats a grave offence. After Mandela arrived at Johannesburg airport on Wednesday, he was greeted by a crowd of supporters waving Palestinian flags. He gave an emotional speech describing the ill treatment that he and his fellow activists were subjected to in Israeli detention. Mandela said that he and his group were held in a prison for 6 days before being deported via Jordan.
We were handcuffed with cable ties, tied tightly behind our backs, taken off our boats, and put on the platform, paraded for all the Israelis and the allies in Europe and the West and the global community to see.
While Mandla Mandela slammed Israel for brutality, he said that his suffering was incomparable to that of the Palestinians.
But it's nothing compared to what Palestinians have been subjected to on a daily basis. We were kidnapped on international waters. Palestinians are attacked, maimed, and killed.
Nelson Mandela's grandson also claimed that he and other South African activists were treated differently because of strained ties between Israel and South Africa. Back in 2023, South Africa filed a genocide case against Israel at the International Court of Justice over its actions in Gaza.
Whilst many of our comrades were offered opportunity to shower, they ensured that the South African delegation was denied this. But we understood very well why that is so. Because we are a nation that dared through our government to take apartheid Israel to the International Court of Justice.
South Africa's open criticism of the Netanyahu government has irked Israel's top ally, the US. This is one of the reasons why the Trump administration has grown averse to Pretoria and imposed a 30% tariff on the country. Yet South Africa has shown no intent of dialing down its criticism of Israel. Meanwhile, Israel has denied all allegations. The Netanyahu government has said that the report of rampant hunger in Gaza has been exaggerated. Israel has dismissed the flotilla as a publicity stunt benefiting Hamas and also denied mistreating the detainees. Now that Israel and Hamas have agreed to the first phase of the Gaza peace deal, the entire world is hoping for the agreement to pave the way for a ceasefire. How and when a complete ceasefire in Gaza would be reached, now that remains to be seen. And on to our last story, Nigeria's economy has shown positive momentum, according to the World Bank. Africa's most populous country is showing signs of stabilization after a series of bold economic reforms initiated by President Bola Tinubu. However, the social impact has been severe, with millions more falling into poverty, according to the World Bank. Now, Nigeria's economy has expanded 3.9% year-on-year in the first half of 2025, which is up from 3.5% in the same period last year. While economic growth is expected to rise from 4.2% this year to 4.4% in 2027. Foreign reserves are at their highest since 2019, and debt to GDP is expected to fall for the first time in a decade. Nigeria's economy is seeing growth in services, non-oil sectors, and a rebound in oil production and agriculture. The World Bank praised the reforms for preventing a fiscal crisis and improving key economic indicators. Since taking office in 2023, President Tinubu has implemented major changes that economists had long recommended. These reforms include liberalizing the exchange rate and removing costly fuel subsidies, which were draining government finances. However, the World Bank warns that these moves, while fixing structural problems, have led to a sharp rise in inflation and the cost of living, especially for food. Now, according to the World Bank's latest report, 61% of Nigerians now live in poverty, which is up from 40% in 2019. The price of a basic food basket has increased fivefold since 2019. The current reforms have not yet improved living standards. The reforms triggered widespread public anger and led to violent protests last year. Many Nigerians expressed anger over the rising cost of living, unemployment, fuel price hikes, and economic reforms under President Tinubu. Labour unions and civil society groups accuse the government of moving too fast without providing social safety nets to protect the most vulnerable. But President Tinubu has defended his policies. In a national address marking Nigeria's 65th Independence Day earlier this month, Tinubu declared that the worst is over following a series of painful reforms.
Seeds of those difficult but necessary decisions are bearing fruits. In resetting our country for sustainable growth, we ended the corrupt fuel subsidy and multiple foreign exchange rates that created massive incentive for a rentier economy, benefiting only a tiny minority. We are racing against time. We must build the road we need, repair the ones that have become descriptive, and construct the schools our children will attend, and the hospitals that will care for our people. We have to plan for the generations that will come after us.
More than half of the Nigerian population lives below the poverty line. Funding cuts by international donors have forced the World Food Programme to shut down 150 nutrition centres in the conflict-hit northeast. So while Nigeria's economy shows signs of recovery, the human cost of reforms remains high. Millions still struggle with rising prices and poverty, highlighting the challenge of balancing economic stability with social welfare. And that's it on the show for today. We will see you again tomorrow at the same time. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.